Hello, good evening, and happy Friday. We are coming to you live with episode 12 of our album discussion series. I'm Matt, and tonight I'm joined by Cam,
Hello.
and we've got Brad with us too. Together, we are Ballpark Music. Every week, we pick an album that came out on Wednesday. Give ourselves just over a week with it, and then come back together for a stream and discussion. Right. But I tell you what is right: no scoring, no taste making, because music is not sports. If you like what you see, just like this water over there in the chat tonight, give us a follow on socials and live. Guys, am I reading this right? Do we discuss albums that came out on Wednesdays, or has this week just created a
I
weird
forgot that.
time vortex in my head?
I forgot that happened and thought you just forgot the word Friday. For a good 15 seconds there. Come on, man, it's not that difficult.
Gotta commit to the bit, man. Gotta commit to the bit. I'm living for those Wednesdays. Yeah, how are your weeks, Brad?
Yeah, it was a week. It was relatively short compared to most weeks, I guess, so that's always an advantage. But yeah, not bad, thanks. How about yours, Matt?
It was good, man. It was all good. It was nice and busy and, just getting us through. Yeah, how's it going, Dreadlocks? Good to see you in chat. Music shouldn't have been any louder, but let us know if you've got any volume issues throughout this, and we will do our best to fix them. Cam, how was your week?
Good, man. I finished Dark. I just feel like pure shit. I just want Martha and Jonas back, so that feels bad.
Spoiler alert.
You'd have to have watched the show. Yeah, good. Got obsessed with some German electronica music. Pretty standard week.
It's a good week. It's a good week. German electronica music, and if I remember what you said about Dark last week, German TV as well.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a German themed couple of weeks, so might move to the Black Forest, who knows.
Yeah, so speaking of consecutive weeks, we're gonna be doing our damnedest to break our longest ever stream record consecutive week setting record. There's a much easier way of saying that. We aren't going to go as long as we have for the last few weeks. At least we won't go that long if I can just start figuring out how to structure a sentence properly from here on out. Yeah, so if you're with us here in chat tonight, keep chiming in, keep keeping us honest, whether it is on the production, whether it is on our volume or anything like that, or if it's just on our timing. So before we get into the album though, guys, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking White Claw because I'm a basic bitch.
Nice. I've got a now warm gin and tonic, which did have icing at some point, but there you go.
Fantastic. And I have got a big old jug of my own pee. No, it's a draft lager from the local brewery that I think I was telling y'all about last week. They put it in a big milk jug, and it's very tasty.
Is this local brewery a van?
Not even. He just
I've
pulls up.
got lager in a milk jug.
It's it's not a lager. It's a session IPA. So let me just get that straight, because apparently now I'm the kind of person
I don't care what the
corrects
guy in the
people
alley
about
told you.
beers. But they just pour it out of the thing, so it's kind of like getting the pump at the pub, but instead it's like, rather than pumping it into a pint glass, they pump it into a milk carton. Yeah, because you're not going to take a glass home with you in your car, are you?
What I'm hearing is that you took DMT or something, wandered into an alley, and some guy gave you a jug of cider, or sorry, IPA, whatever it is. And now that you're walking around claiming this is what it is, drinking whatever from a milk jug.
If that's the case,
No,
at
no,
least it's
you're doing it wrong.
citrusy and it's mangoey and it's lovely.
You're doing it wrong though. You shouldn't be drinking it out of a glass. You should be drinking it straight from the jug.
I thought you were gonna say I should just get a single pint milk bottle and be drinking it out of that, right? Like just pour it from the big milk jug to the smaller one.
Did it
Don't
have
do
like
that. Just straight from the jug, man. Just take a big old, milk jug swig.
I tell you what, I brought the jug up because I knew I would get through a pint fairly quickly, especially if we're talking about my DMT and pee drinking habits. I'll probably fly through it very quickly. So when we get to the point that I've finished up, rather than pouring a fresh one, I might just go out of the jug. We'll see how we feel when we hit that point.
Does it have kind of a layer of curdled milk at the bottom, or has it been washed out before they filled it for you?
I'm hoping they've procured them fresh, but hey, who knows?
Okay.
Who knows? Look, so despite the technical infringement that we covered off the top about this album coming out on a Wednesday, we have got the second Black Midi album. Cavalcade. God damn. All week I was just like, I shouldn't mispronounce what the album's called. And then as soon as I've looked at the letters on the screen, they've just rearranged themselves. I knew exactly how it was pronounced like 2 days ago.
Isn't it Cavalcade?
Yeah, Cavalcade. That's it.
Cavalcade.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't you just say Cavalcade?
Yeah, I did. Because that was the whole thing. Just give me one more time. Get me in the zone here.
All right, go.
No. Give me the title again. Get me in the zone.
Cavalcade.
Yeah, Cavalcade. We've got the second Black Midi album, Cavalcade, on the docket tonight. Let's take a look at the press release. So this came out, Rough Trade Records. Black Midi's Cavalcade is a dynamic, hellacious, and inventive follow-up to 2019's widely praised Schlagenheim. Quote, a labyrinth with hairpin turn episodes and lyrics full of dourly corrosive observations, according to the New York Times. It scales beautiful new heights, pulling widely from a plethora of genres and influences, reaching ever upwards from an already lofty base of earlier achievements. Black Midi, that's Jordy Greep on guitar, primary vocals, Cameron Picton on bass and vocals, and Morgan Simpson on drums. Picture Cavalcade as a line of larger-than-life figures, from a cult leader fallen on hard times and an ancient corpse found in a diamond mine, to legendary cabaret singer Marlene Dietrich strolling seductively past them. The groundwork for Cavalcade was laid in 2019 musical sketches that had been brewing since the release of Schlagenheim. But with this album, there was a, quote, yearning to be more considered and record something that was more harmonically interesting and challenging. Quote, it's easy to get wrapped up in the improvisation myth of divine intervention, that if a song doesn't happen in the room naturally without it being guided by someone specifically, when we're all just feeling the vibe, then it's not proper and it's not pure, says Greep. That's kind of a dangerous thing because you end up never trying something different, or you just abandon an idea if it doesn't work out at first, end quote. With this new approach in mind, half of Cavalcade was written by individual members at home and brought to the table in rehearsal, with original band member, guitarist, vocalist Matt Kwasniewski Calvin taking time away from the group to focus on his mental health. Black Midi chose to augment their sound on Cavalcade rather than replicate it, with saxophonist Kaidi Aknebi and keyboard player Seth Evans. So, Cam, you introduced me to Black Midi a couple of years back, so I'll throw you in a moment to talk a little bit more about the band. But I just wanted to stop and take a second to shout out the bravery of Kwasniewski Calvin taking a step back to focus on his mental health and being so open about it. The band shared a statement on this earlier in the year. I think it should be commended, particularly given the news this week about Naomi Osaka. And the downright nasty takes some segments of the media have been all too quick to offer on it. Check in with your friends if you're struggling yourself. We'll drop some helpline bits into the chat here on Twitch and into the YouTube descriptions for the video right here. But yeah, Cam, tell me a little bit more about Black Midi and how you came across them.
How did I discover Black Midi? I feel like this feels like a bit like chicken and egg scenario. I can't remember if I saw the record in a record shop first or I heard it and then bought the record without really knowing them. Either way, I ended up with a Black Midi record without really knowing them, and was immediately hooked after I heard the riffs on 953, one of the opening tracks on that album. It's track 2, absolutely incredible. Tell this is a phenomenal band with just know pretty much everything you need to, theory wise, technicality wise, all that good stuff. But on that album as well, they could combine it with groove, they could combine it with great melody, all sorts of stuff, and then you've got this bizarre vocal style that I get the feeling is probably a bit Marmite, but I quite enjoyed it from the first album. So yeah, that's I didn't really know too much about them other than I've listened to that album quite a lot.
You have got the sort of I think the part of the story that everybody knows is that they're very young and they met at a South London arts music school, all incredibly gifted technically, and incredibly talented. So Schlagenheim was nominated for the Mercury Prize in the year that came out. Didn't end up winning it, but heck of an achievement, I think, for a band that were just breaking onto the scene. Had only been together for like 2 years at that point as well. But yeah, Brad, what's your experience, if any, of Black Midi?
So I think, Cameron, you probably sent me that first album as well around the same time and sent it to Matt. I've not really revisited it since. Kind of before that, I was aware of Black Midi, the genre, I guess, more than the artist. I guess it kind of relates to the sound, but so from my limited knowledge of Black Midi, it's something that was kind of fairly popular in Japan. It's a style of music which is based on like music that's essentially impossible to play. So the MIDI roll on your door or whatever you're using to program it would basically be filled with notes, hence the name kind of Black Midi, as it takes up all the space. Had a limited bit of success on YouTube as a kind of meme, I think, in Europe.
Like a YouTube thing, yeah.
Yeah. So that was my kind of experience before hearing of the band.
Great. So yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I had Black Midi recommended to me back tail end of 2019 by Cam. I didn't get a chance to mention it when we had our radio discussion last week, but I was in a deep BBC Radio 6 music hole back in my commuting days. And they were supporting this band very heavily at the time as well. I vividly remember my first listen through of Schlagenheim, though, accompanying an hour of wrapping Christmas presents on Christmas Eve. And whilst it wasn't exactly traditional Christmas music, I was hooked. It's artsy, it's weird. Overall, I thought it was just pure creativity and fun, and a band that seemed determined to paint outside the numbers, right? So yeah, really looking forward to this album coming up, whatever it was going to end up being. Genuinely, you could tell me that the new Black Midi album was actually just like a letter to the editor in a local paper somewhere up in the Northeast, and I would believe you at this point. Yeah, no, very pleased that they've come back, I think, relatively quickly for a band that was as sprawling as this one.
Yeah, I think they needed to. They had such a big kind of album with Schlagenheim that if they hadn't come back quickly, capitalized on that, it's the way the industry works these days, isn't it?
Do you get the sense that they're a band that's achieved both critical and like not financial, but like sales success? I'm not really sure where they end up falling on that.
I think probably to do better than you'd think, because I think a band like this is probably big amongst vinyl heads, people that like actually buying music rather than streaming.
Who are those people?
Probably appeals to those kind of people. Don't know any. Yeah, but you know, I mean, they probably haven't done very well for the last 2 years out of it, but you know, do fairly well at live shows, I think. So fairly regular tours. Not huge venues, but not small venues either. So yeah, I think they do all right. They're obviously very critically acclaimed. And I don't think they're just a UK thing either. I think they're quite big or known in America and the rest of Europe. No idea about Asia, but yeah.
Anyway, shall we get into the track by track? We've just got the 8 of them this week, which I think is the fewest we've covered to date, but we still go for a rousing 42 minutes. And yeah, we kick off with John L. And I think it's fair to say I am immediately lost. I was playing this song earlier on today. When my wife walked into the room, she just turned to me and said cheerily, "Hey, this is exactly what a panic attack sounds like." Cam, what were you getting here?
It's not wrong. Yeah, I don't know if you can sum it up in any better way than that. It does sound like what a panic attack sounds like, feels like even, which is quite a difficult thing to achieve musically, I guess. You got that huge snare roll intro, off kilter strings, it's really discordant. It sounds bad, but it kind of sounds good at the same time. And the song moves so quickly between sections that you just never really get a chance to catch your breath, and it's just it's a little bit too much. It's a bit too intense of a way to start an album for me. It just flies rapidly through the first verse, then there's that stop-start bit, and then you're back into another verse, and you just never have a time to actually think about what you're hearing, really you know, sort of adjust to this kind of chaos that's happening. Yeah, it's a wild song.
So I think one of the first things that struck me about this track is the evolution of Greep's vocals from Schlagenheim to Cavalcade. Um, I had to go back and double check if I was misremembering how he sounded on the last album. It's always been a unique delivery. I wasn't sure where the band were from when I first heard him sing, and I was certainly surprised when I read London. It's a proper, like, geographically unclassifiable accent. It's a bit like if Tommy Wiseau fronted a band, I think. But yeah, you know, while he sounded like he was simply kind of like parodying singing on Schlagenheim, it's evolved here. A lot of the nasally elements have been replaced with a deeper, bassier tone. And I think immediately for me it was a little less grating than on the last album. Like you say, Cam, it's very Marmite, and it's still very Marmite here. But that change I think makes a lot of sense, probably on some tracks later on in this album.
Actually, kind of felt the other way about it, you know. I did notice that there was a significant shift, but I kind of felt that it was for the worse. This sounds like parody to me. It sounds like he's parody. You know, when you're messing around, you're still like with friends or whatever, and you're singing a song, but you're putting a stupid voice on. It kind of feels like he shifted to doing that for their actual music, and it's very. I found it very odd.
You could describe it as warbly, maybe, I guess, right? Like, yeah, definitely. Brad, what were you thinking here?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of the vocal, I kind of thought it was kind of a thick, kind of Irish accent sound to me. Very surprised to hear they are from London, like you say. I don't know if that is some kind of parody or if it's kind of alluding to the lyrics to me sound kind of like they would be a folk song in a kind of way. So maybe it's kind of a play on that. There's lots of noise here. Not all of it necessarily massively pleasant. It immediately strikes you as, okay, this is an album that you're not going to have on in the background. This is an album that is kind of demand that you actually listen to it if you want to have any kind of understanding of where in the world you are at the time. Lots of tension in this track, very, very little release. The mix kind of struck me straight away. A few of the tones in here, like the bass tone, it's kind of almost what I would describe as like a quacky kind of piezo tone on the bass. Not pleasant. Not sure it was meant to be pleasant. So I think that is something done for deliberate effect. I think it is supposed to kind of jar you and supposed to kind of give you this expectation. But yeah, lots of atonal kind of chromaticisms going on, lots of big noises. Becomes apparent they're not going to be a band that is kind of limited to one speed or one gear. It goes through about 6 different gears in this track, I think. Like you said, Cameron, it really does keep you on your toes, and you don't really get a chance to catch your breath. Yeah, it's a big introductory song.
Hey, the other thing that stood out to me about the mix, man, was the drums. I thought the drums sounded like the drumming itself is phenomenal throughout the album. Can't say otherwise. The kid has got to be one of the best drummers I've ever heard play. But the mixing of the drums itself just felt like so lost in the bass. It almost felt like there was so much stuff happening that the engineer would have just had a horrific time with masking, or something like that. And I just felt like that and the bass, and it might have been deliberate, it might have been a on purpose kind of thing, but I don't think it wasn't working for me, certainly.
I think the bass probably was deliberate. I think everything on this kind of album to me sounds really dry. You've not, well, drums and bass, especially in this track anyway, like there are moments where you do get some kind of cavernous like hall reverbs going on, like building atmosphere and stuff, but there's a lot of kind of dry sound, and a lot of things sound really up close and like in your face, and at times claustrophobic, especially when it's so busy. But I think that kind of leans into that like panic attack vibe that we've already mentioned. You know, things do sound so close; they're so like competing for space. It sounds kind of messy, but I would hesitantly say that was a deliberate effect rather than like just a bad mix, because there are moments on this album where the mix is like pretty sublime. There are moments where I think it is used as a tool to kind of add to that vibe of like, panic and claustrophobia.
It's really interesting. As soon as you've said the drums on this track, I think I've realized that throughout this whole thing, I probably haven't made any notes about the percussion. Maybe 1 or 2 here or there, but only when something changes up. So yeah, not really picked up on that. But you know, you talked about different gears. I mean, I'm such a sucker for math rock. Literally had a conversation at the weekend, completely apropos of nothing, about how much I miss Marmozets right now. Very much looking forward to them making some new music, which apparently they are, which is great. But anyway, it should therefore come as no surprise that I really like this track. Timing isn't a thing that exists for Black Midi, and it's not, been the case on the last album as well. But the chaos always seems to sync up just right. And this time we've got saxophones, strings, and piano thrown into the mix. It's unexpected. I think, both for a Black Midi album, but also for something that's within quite a mathy setting. But I love how like the prog and the math are so intertwined. It's an experience, but one I definitely enjoyed. Overstimulating panic attack. And yeah, it's interesting though. You reach the end of the track, and thinking about what we've been talking about with intros and things like that in recent weeks, kind of reached the point where I'm like, I just need to take the headphones off for a second here. Like, I need to give everything a rest. That's too much, especially for a man who hasn't been outside much in the last 15 months. But yeah, no, it's well done, very well done.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as calling it math or prog. This gave me more jazz vibes, and I don't know if that was just because of the instrumentation that was chosen. You know, piano and sax played in this way just makes me think jazz. Brad will be able to obviously give more detail on that, whether it does fall under the jazz umbrella in some way or not. But yeah, that's kind of where it fell for me. I think it's one of those things. Whenever you hear a band do something that isn't in 4/4, you know, you kind of want to go, it's math. They're doing math. But I don't know. Maybe it could be. I just didn't ever think about it that way.
I always think of math as being cutting back and forth between time signatures rather than doing something slightly different. But yeah, sorry, yeah, Brad is far more qualified to speak on this.
Yeah, I mean, at some point I did give up trying to quantify exactly, what time signature people were playing in. But I don't think it really matters. There's a lot of kind of jazz influence throughout this album, like harmonically. There's also a lot that reminds me of Zappa in quite a few ways. So obviously, again, like heavy jazz influence coming through there. Yeah, I think when we get on to possibly the next track, it'll be kind of obvious that these guys obviously listen to a lot of jazz. It does like kind of harken back to a lot of kind of avant-garde jazz. Some of the stuff Miles was doing later in his career. There's lots of like atonality, lots of dissonance, and like I said earlier, very little kind of release from that tension.
So, just to mention before we move on, I did some cursory Googling to see if I could track down the titular John L. Apparently, there was a boxer in the 1800s known as John L. to his friends, but the media dubbed him the Boston Strongboy, which is a fantastic boxing name. I'm not sure if he's who we're talking about here, but that was as close as we got. And the lyrics do make reference to a John 50 instead. But anyway, on to the second track, Marlene Dietrich, who is at least a little easier to track down on Google, a German-born American actress whose career spanned from the 1910s all the way through to the 1980s. She starred in Sternberg, Hitchcock, and Wells films throughout her career, though she is equally well known for housing German and French refugees and advocating their American citizenship during the war, and her morale-boosting performances to soldiers on the front line. Brad, do you want to talk us through what welcomes us to her namesake?
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, jazz influence starts to come through here like pretty massively. This is a bossa nova, like straight off the bat. Bossa nova is a kind of a variation on samba from Brazil. It kind of started getting big in the 50s and 60s. Possibly the most famous example would be Girl from Ipanema, and you have heard it. You can guarantee that everyone's heard it. You just don't know what you've heard it from. A lot of people would say elevator music, which is very unfair in comparison. But I think it was even on some kind of comedy TV show where he brings up the records. He brings up this record shop and he's like, "Do you know this song?" And it goes like dee 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 dee. But yeah, something that's kind of ingrained in public consciousness, I think, just because it's such a massive song. Yeah, bossa nova sound, lots of jazz chords, lots of jazz harmony going on. Compared to where we just got from, like, wow, what a massive change. I think if it had been two of those back to back, you would have probably had a very hard time getting anywhere with this album. But yeah, this was a welcome little break. In terms of bossa novas, it's like in a way, it's a kind of typical chord progression. You've got lots of things coming through from jazz, like loads of 2-5-1s. The A section, as I would describe it, is a bit strange, and it's like a 6-bar phrase, and it kind of feels like you don't really know where the loop is. I think we get so used to having like 8 bars is like 4 and 8 is like our kind of standard.